Alright guys, it's time for part 2 of the oil filter housing retrofit, and this part is going to be the installation of the oil cooler. So just where we left off in part 1,
You're gonna learn today.
I'll show you guys just to give you a refresher of where we're at. But all I'm going to do right now or next is basically just take off the wheel on the right side of the vehicle and also take apart the splash shield for the wheel well. Just so that we can get in there and get the oil cooler in there. So the job should be fairly easy, but also hard at the same time.
Oh, hell no!
Only because this one didn't come with an oil cooler. So I'm not sure if this one's gonna mount correctly or if I'm gonna run into any issues. So I'm gonna take on the hardest part first, which is trying to mount the actual oil cooler on. But here, I'll give you guys a look at where we're at. All right, so from the top, the only thing that I have really taken apart is the part of the plastic intake system over here. That's the only thing I still have off, only because it just gives me a little more room. But that's really all the room that I need for the oil cooler lines. So as you see, yeah, this is still open, so you definitely don't want to run the car with that just like that. But as for everything else, everything's put back together. The other thing that I have taken apart, now we're going to move on to the underside, is the entire under tray. So the front under tray, I took that all apart. And then as for the wheel well, there are two separate pieces. So you see that fender lining right there and that fender lining right there. That all came off so that I could get a good look here of where I'm going to be working with this oil cooler. So it's pretty simple, straightforward. Just follow all the bolts and it'll come right out. Not too hard. And now we're at the toughest part. So obviously the wheel's also off, which makes it easier. But now the toughest part, I think we're going to have to wait even more. I'm going to have to wait another day because I think I'm going to be ordering some OE parts just to make this easier. I don't want to fabricate or have anybody fabricate anything for me. I want to make this as clean as possible and see if I can use OEM parts, especially because I got the smaller oil cooler and it's not really that big. I feel like I can use it with the OE parts. So I'm going to look and see what I can order. As you can see, this was plugged up. I believe that's where the OEM mounting arm for the oil cooler goes. But yeah, I'm going to try to see if there's any way that we can do this without doing any cutting. I know there are some people that have cut into the plastic a little bit, not too much. But if we do end up doing it, I promise you guys that it's not very much cutting. But I'm going to do my best to see if we can avoid that. So yeah, this is where we're leaving off right now. All right, boys, here's where we're at. So I ended up connecting the adapter that goes to the oil filter housing. So the gaskets go on the top where they insert into the oil filter housing, then goes the adapter here, and then your lines. And then there's a bolt in the middle that you tighten, and that snugs the adapter up against the oil filter housing. So right now I just mocked up the lines. They're running all the way down here, and as you can see, they are pretty long, so I'm actually going to have to cut them. And from what you can see from the tape, I already marked them off where I want to cut them. So I'm just going to pull them back out, cut them, and then try to see if I can either keep them that length or cut them even more. And then I also have an update for you guys. Any of you with the Z4 and want to keep a OEM look, unfortunately that's not going to work. The design of the bracket for the oil cooler on the Z4 is too small and specific. So you won't be able to reuse that for a G Plus oil cooler. We're just going to have to rig this up here with zip ties as far back as we can with the hoses and just secure it with zip ties. I was hoping to maybe use an OEM bracket and try to make do, but it's not going to work. I did a bunch of research and there's a bracket specific for the Z4 which won't work with the G Plus oil cooler. But I'm hoping that this oil cooler fits really nicely. I already kind of mocked it up in there and it does fit very well. There's enough space. It's just my main concern is securing it so that it doesn't really move too much over bumps and stuff like that, or even some potholes, that I'll be safe and then the oil cooler doesn't explode oil all over. Well, that was a pain in the ass. As I imagine these, since they're like off-brand oil cooler lines, they're not really easy to cut and also to readjust with the AN fittings on the hose once you cut them. But like I suggested to you guys, be sure to tape them off where you want to cut and then use a cutoff wheel of some sort. So my cut was very smooth. Just getting these AN fittings off and then putting them back on was kind of a pain in the ass, but it's done now and they're cut to length. Hopefully this will line up like I want it to, because I don't really want to do it again. I'm pretty sure it will, but now it's time to put these oil cooler lines back on and just route them how I want them. So as you guys will see, the orientation of the oil cooler is going to be a little different than the way that I'm going to put it on. But I'll show you which way the lines are supposed to route and where they're supposed to attach. Here you can see the adapter's just still chilling there, but it's all tight and hooked up. I don't know if you guys can see that bolt. I know I mentioned that already, that there's a bolt in the middle that tightens that to snug it up against the oil cooler housing. So yeah, let's go ahead and see how I measured and see if it turns out. So this tool was extremely helpful. It's a wrench specifically made for AN fittings and it's adjustable. I would recommend getting one of these. I'll link it in the description. As for everything else, I was able to route all the lines, and you guys will want to make sure to measure twice and cut once, especially if you're using this kit, because it's very not meant to be taken apart and put back together. So as long as you guys measure correctly, you shouldn't have any issues. And for any of you with the Z4, we're just going to have to make do. And this is what I did. I just used this bungee cord, wrapped it around in place. And you can see here where my lines are going. So it's tucked up in there, secure. The only worst case scenario that could happen, and this could even happen with a regular oil cooler as well, is if you hit a giant pothole and somehow the wheel hits the oil cooler, or the ground hits the oil cooler, something, or a rock, not sure, whatever could happen, then your oil cooler would be screwed. But you can see where I fed the lines here, this right angle one over here, the straight one through there, right through this, the top of this frame here. And then we come up here under the radiator hose and then over to the oil filter housing. So pretty straightforward. They both fit. I'm guessing if you ever do any coolant work, you're going to have to remove the lines. Not completely, but just unbolt them. Maybe put some sort of little plastic bag over them so they don't leak. But it shouldn't be too much of a hassle just to constantly unscrew these. And I'm sure you won't have to be doing that much coolant work where you'll keep doing it over and over again. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. As for me, eventually when I do my radiator to the CSF one, I'm going to have to do that. But as you notice here, everything is tightened up down there with the AN wrench. And I still have to tighten this one. It's just hand tight. But I left this one unbolted or unscrewed, whatever you want to say, because I'm going to attempt to fill this up and kind of prime it with oil before I connect it and tighten it down and then start the car. So I'm not going to bolt everything back up just in case I see any leaks. But I already kind of mocked up the wheel well liner and it really fit perfectly, which was really nice because it's not that big of an oil cooler. And then another thing that I wanted to mention, there is still some holes in this little trim here, so it will get air from there. I was still contemplating making a little more holes just for more airflow, but we'll see. That can be done after. But yeah, I'll go ahead and prime the lines with oil and then we'll get to starting the vehicle. Alright guys, so everything's all set up. I tightened both AN fittings and it's primed with oil. And then because just in case I had to disconnect the coolant lines and a bunch of coolant leaked out, and then I topped it off with coolant, I went through the bleeding process for the water pump, which you just turn the heat up all the way, lowest setting and hold the gas pedal for 12 seconds, and you let that cycle for 12 minutes just to make sure there's not any air in the coolant system. So now it's time to start the car and just see if we get any leaks. And we're already leaking. So I ended up having to tighten that fitting a little bit more. I cleaned up the area from that oil leak. So this one had to be tightened a little more. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little afraid tightening these fittings just because it seems like the oil cooler lines are such low quality. So if anything, I'm definitely going to be upgrading the oil cooler lines later down the road to some higher end ones. As for the oil cooler, it's nothing special. I have a off-brand intercooler as well. I don't think there's much that can go wrong with the cooler, but for the lines, they are definitely low quality. So I'm still running the car just in case anything else starts to leak. Everything looks good so far. I did probably lose about half a quart of oil, which I will be topping off later, but I'm gonna let the car run for a while, see if I get any more leaks, probably let it get up to temperature, and then update you guys. As you can see, guys, wheel liner is back on. Don't even notice the oil cooler. There's no bulging or anything anywhere. Just the same amount of clearance as before. The only thing is that's really only secured by that bungee cord and the oil cooler lines. Maybe later down the road I'll have somebody fabricate a custom bracket specifically for this size of oil cooler, but this will do just for now. And the wheels mounted back on as well, which you guys probably noticed. Everything looks good. I'm just missing the intake ducting here, which I'll put back on. They're sitting over here. That's the last thing that I really have taken apart. I think I told you guys earlier that I lost about half a quart of oil at the beginning, so I'll make sure to top that off. But I'm going to put this back together, lower the car, and it should be a wrap for this whole job now. Funny little thing here, I actually drilled out some holes here, as you can see, just for a little more airflow. Just got to make do sometimes. Alright, to be honest with you guys, I would definitely go ahead and order different oil cooler lines if you're going to do this job, like some Mishimoto oil cooler lines, or if you know of any other brand that you want to go with, and you just want to order that G Plus oil cooler separately instead of the whole kit with the cooler lines. I would go ahead and do that just because I don't think that if I were to do it again, I would get the whole G Plus oil cooler kit just because of how bad those lines were, and working with those lines was a pain in the ass, especially when I was cutting and trying to put the fittings back on. But we're all done now, and I'm pretty happy with the result as of right now. I did rev the engine pretty high while it was warmed up just to see if anything would happen with the oil pressure. And I'd rather have it happen in the garage than out on the road. And then I would have to tow the car because of the oil issue if it were to spill all over. But yeah, I'm glad to finally have the oil cooler in the Z4. I hope this helps you guys, and I hope that you can see all the things that we ran into, all the issues, so that you're ready to do your oil cooler when you're ready for that process. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.